With diversity, equity and inclusion agendas at the front of mind, our next speaker is here to share the important insights of how to empower a neurodiverse workforce. We're going to be finding out how this charitable organisation is prioritising inclusion and creating positive change. So joining us today from Alzheimer's Research UK, please welcome Aoife Casson.
Hi everyone, my name's Aoife, as wonderfully introduced by Sim. I work at Alzheimer's Research UK. My pronouns are she, her, and a little bit about my disabilities. I'm autistic, dyslexic, dyspraxic, and dysgraphic, so not quite the full set, but almost there. So I'm going to be talking to you guys a bit about neurodiversity in the workplace today. I know this is a new topic for a lot of people, and I know it's quite complex. There's a lot of tricky words, so I'm going to run through some key words for you first. I know not everyone's a natural note taker, so by all means, take pictures of the slides, do audio recordings, and I'm pretty sure you can watch this recording back for like 30 days or something, so definitely take advantage of that. So some key words just to run through. Firstly, simple one, EDI, stands for equality or equity. Diversity and inclusion, also known as like D&I, I&D, DE&I, all the same thing. Next, we've got equality. That is quite literally treating everyone the same. Very simple. Afterwards, we've got equity. This is where it gets a little bit tricky. Equity means giving everybody the resources and support they need to succeed. So what I like to think in this situation is like a little bit of an acronym, so a little bit of a sort of analogy. If you think you've got a cafe, if you want to be equal, you might say, well, everyone's welcome to my cafe, everyone's allowed in, that's equal. Great. Equity would mean, say, allowing everyone to have the resources they need to get in. So you might have a step into your cafe. That's not going to stop me coming into the cafe, but it might stop like a wheelchair user. So you're going to give them a ramp to get into the cafe. Now, you might say, well, you're giving that wheelchair user more access. Yeah, so it's not equal, but it's equitable because they are still able to get in just like me. That's what equity means. Diverse, I like to think of diverse as like a fruit salad. So it's basically a group of people with a variety of different backgrounds, different cultures, different life experiences. Neurodiverse, now we're getting into the tricky things. So neurodiverse is quite literally a group of people who think in different ways. So it's just like diverse, but specifically talking about your brain. Neurodivergent, a little bit different. So neurodivergent refers to an individual person who has a specific condition that causes them to think differently. So for example, you've got ADHD, autism, dyslexia, Tourette's, OCD, the list goes on. Then you've got neurotypical. It's quite literally someone who isn't neurodivergent. So it's just the opposite of neurodivergent. And then the final letter in EDI is inclusion. This just means that everyone is feeling included, valued, involved, no one's left out or forgotten. Finally, privilege. This is a little bit of a hot button topic. So what I mean when I talk about privilege is just the absence of unseen barriers as a result of factors that are probably out of your control, such as your race, socioeconomic background, gender, sexuality, etc. So I like to think of a little analogy for this is, you know, when you've got a cold and you're all bunged up in your nose and you can't breathe clearly, and you sit there, you're feeling rotten, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, why didn't I appreciate all those days where I could breathe clearly? But when you've not got a cold, you don't spend all your time thinking how well you can breathe. That's a really, really rough example of what privilege is like. So it just means you're not necessarily noticing those barriers that other people might have. So on that topic, I've got a few disclaimers for you. Firstly, I'm not a monolith, so I'm really excited to be talking to you guys today about disability inclusion, but I'm not the final word on that. And I just really hope that you take this session and then you use it as an opportunity to just open up more conversations about neurodiversity, about disability inclusion. My second disclaimer, as you may have noticed, I am a white, cisgender, middle-class woman. So my differences are going to vary quite significantly from those who have different experiences, different privileges from me. So just bear that in mind. And thirdly, I refer a few times in today's session about people who have various conditions, such as me with autism. When I refer to people having a condition, I mean people who are both diagnosed by a professional and people who are self-diagnosed. And that's really important to make sure that we're including people from different backgrounds and different communities, because not everyone can access a diagnosis. So those are my disclaimers. Now, I mentioned I'm the Internal Communications Manager at Alzheimer's Research UK. So a little bit about the internal comms team. We are a small but mighty team of 2 within an organisation of roughly 220 people and still growing. The internal comms sort of function is about 4.5 years old, and I've been in the team for about 2.5 years now. The team sits within the Chief Executive Office, so separate from, say, HR or comms or marketing. But as well as being a team of 2, we've also got voluntary internal comms champions. We call them our comms champs. And these are voluntary roles. They're representatives from different teams from across the organisation. And they are basically fully trained up on our Unily intranet. They have all the training so that then they can publish content. They can update their team pages on behalf of their team. And they are fantastic. I love our comms champs. So like I mentioned, we have a Unily intranet. It's called Campus. And that is where we put all of our key documents. We've got our policies there. Across the organisation, and they are basically fully trained up on our Unily intranet. They have all the training so that then they can publish content, they can update their team pages on behalf of their team, and they are fantastic. I love our comms champs. So like I mentioned, we have a Unily intranet. It's called Campus, and that is where we put all of our key documents. We've got our policies there. We also have sort of blog posts, news pieces, all that sort of stuff is housed on Campus. And then that's kind of supported by Yammer, so that's where all our comments go, and also all of our kind of informal comms. So because we sit within the Chief Executive Office team, we also work directly with our CEO, so we support her with her kind of monthly newsletters, our monthly all-employee meetings, which are virtual, and that's really great because we get to ensure that she's being seen by people from across the organisation, which is fantastic. We have Agile and remote workers, so these are mostly Agile workers, so we are mostly working from home, but we come into the office about 2 days a week. I'm an Agile worker. And we've also got remote workers, so these are employees who work across the UK and do some fantastic work for the charity. So I mentioned EDI at Alzheimer's Research UK. I'm very proud to be part of our working group, on the EDI working group. It's very exciting stuff going on. So inclusion has been a really central theme to internal comms ever since I joined the team about 2.5 years ago. But we launched our EDI-specific initiative back, we started developing it back in 2020 in response to the pandemic, which put a huge spotlight on sort of social inequalities, health inequalities, so specifically, as we are a dementia research charity, inequalities around dementia. So, for example, 65% of people living with dementia are women, and also women are more likely to be carers for people with dementia. And the pandemic really put a spotlight on those sorts of inequalities. So yeah, we started developing the EDI strategy back in 2020, but we actually launched our first strategy a year later in 2021. That was a 1-year strategy, so we've actually just launched our second strategy, which is a 2-year strategy. And for both of our strategies, our first one and our one we've just launched, authenticity was a really key priority. We decided very early on that we would much rather be sort of slow and steady, make meaningful change, and get it right, than rush to implement something, which is why we sort of started developing our EDI initiative back in 2020, but we didn't launch it for a full year because we wanted to make sure we were getting it right. So, like I said, we have launched our second strategy, and this is a 2-year strategy. And this year, with our strategy, we really want to focus on kind of longer term, meaningful change. We want to make sure we're listening. We want to make sure we're learning from what we learned from our first initiative. And like I said, we want to make really long-standing, meaningful change, both within the organisation and externally with our fundraising and with the research we fund. So our initiative was directly related to our organisational vision, and this is really, really important to us because we want to make sure that EDI is like a sort of golden thread that just weaves through everything we do. It's not an add-on. So our vision at Alzheimer's Research UK is for a world free from the fear, harm and heartbreak of dementia. And within our EDI initiative, we recognise that in order to achieve that goal, we have to make sure we reach every single person who lives with dementia and is affected by dementia, right? And that means we have to reach everyone, regardless of their identity, their experience, their perspective. We need to reach everyone. So internally, we've done loads. We've also done loads externally, but internally we've done loads. So we've really focused on educating and building awareness through our campus blog posts and our Yammer posts. This has been really important to us because we recognise that not everyone is at the same point in that EDI journey. And because it's an EDI for inclusion journey, we want to make sure everyone's been included. So we used campus blogs on our intranet to really promote personal stories. We wanted to promote sort of resources and all that sort of stuff. And we really wanted to empower employees to share their personal stories, regardless of whether they were really big stories or quite small. So we've published around 27 personal stories so far on our intranet, and they are consistently our most read content, despite actually the fact that our recent internal comms survey suggests that people don't necessarily go to our internet for personal stories. They actually go for, you know, key documents and that sort of stuff. But we can see from our stats that actually, when they get to their intranet, they really want to stay for those personal stories. And we've had stories on all sorts of things from, you know, sort of educational resources for Black History Month, informational stories around International Day of Older People, people talking about their anxiety, their disabilities. I've posted a blog on my autism, and the response we get has always been just so fantastic and heartwarming. We've also recently introduced audio recordings to our blog posts to improve accessibility, and this has been really great because it was just so easy, and actually means that our blog posts are much more accessible for people who find reading difficult, but also for people who want to multitask, for people who are working from home and feel like folding their laundry whilst they're listening to the blogs. That's why we've done those, and it's been really great. We've had some really great feedback on that. So that's what we've done so far. Where do we want to go next? Well, we're certainly not stopping. We're really continuing to put inclusion at the heart of everything we do. So we're using our platforms, especially our intranet, to uplift voices through uploading content and to generally nurture our organizational culture, because we are growing as an organization. We are only 220 employees, but that number is increasing pretty much by the day at the moment. We're also working directly with our learning and development team to really build a calendar of EDI content to support learning opportunities, because like I said, not everyone is at the same point in their learning journey as someone else. Now you're probably thinking, hang on a second, that's all well and good, Aoife. But what has all this got to do with neurodiversity? I came along to a session to hear somebody talk about neurodiversity, and so far all you've nattered on about is EDI. Well, it's funny you should say that. In my opinion, neurodiversity is a fact of life. It's literally all around us. And I've got some stats to back this up. I should say that these are kind of UK stats, but you can definitely find these stats for whatever country you're in. So at the moment, it's estimated that 1 in 7 people in the UK are neurodivergent. So that's about 14%. The charity ADHD Aware actually suggests it could be as high as 30 to 40%, which I'm inclined to believe. The average employment rate for disabled people in the UK is shockingly low. I mean, if we look at the employment rate for sort of non-disabled people, it's at 81%. For disabled people, that drops down to 53%, but the two lowest employment rates for two groups are for those with autism at 29%, and those with specific learning difficulties, that's what SLD stands for there, which is at 26.2%. So I'm employed, I am autistic, I am one of that 29%, which makes me a minority. And that's not only because neurodivergent people, autistic people, because neurodivergent people find it harder to get jobs in the first place. It's also because we're not really doing everything we could to make the workplace as inclusive and supportive as we could. And so people aren't staying in those jobs. For the most part, neurodivergent conditions are generally considered to be inherited, but that means they kind of don't really discriminate. Anyone from any kind of race, sort of background, sex, culture, financial situation, anyone could be neurodivergent. However, those from the more marginalised communities tend to have less access to resources and support. For example, in the UK, you can get diagnosed with autism or ADHD on the NHS, which is free, and that's fantastic. But if you wanted to get diagnosed with dyslexia, you would have to pay for it, which means if you're struggling to afford the basics, you're probably not going to stretch to pay for that, and then you miss out on the support that's needed, which is why I always say people who are self-diagnosed are still totally valid, right? So these stats really paint a picture, and they tell us that neurodiversity pretty much intersects with every single protected characteristic. And that means two things. Firstly, a diverse organization is a neurodiverse organization. Speaks for itself. The second thing is that a workplace that supports neurodivergent people actually benefits everyone. This might surprise you, but this is called the curb-cut effect. Now you're probably thinking, the curb what now? I'm hilarious. The curb-cut effect is this really fantastic idea that the accommodations we make to improve accessibility for disabled people actually benefit everyone. So an example I like to give is, let's say you live in an apartment block and you live on the 8th floor, and let's say they've installed a lift because there's a wheelchair user on the 10th floor. Now, I don't need to be a wheelchair user to know that I would much rather take the lift onto the 8th floor than walk up 8 flights of stairs. So I've benefited from an accommodation put in place for another disabled person. Now, what does this curb-cut effect mean for you in your workplace? Well, it actually means two things. Firstly, the time and money that you put in to provide support for a small group of people will actually benefit everyone. So it's 100% worth the time, the effort, the money. The second thing is that when you make your projects, your comms, your product inclusive and accessible by design, you're ensuring that everyone can engage from day one. And that's really important because that means all the work you've put into your massive projects are going to pay off because everyone can engage. So that's very interesting, and I'm sure you've already learnt loads. But you probably want some useful things that you can take back with you, some actions that you can bring forward. So what can you do to empower your neurodivergent employees? Well, I've got 4 things for you. Firstly, it's really important that you think of neurodiversity as part of your EDI initiative. Any strategy that aims to make an organization more equitable, more diverse, and more inclusive should include neurodivergent people by design. If you single out specific if you single out specific initiatives for neurodiversity, it's really easy to forget about all the other identities that can intersect with it. For example, race, religion, socioeconomic background. It just makes more sense to group them all together and focus on including people on the whole. Also, when you separate it from your wider EDI work, it can make it harder to assign budget and resources, which, as internal comms people, we already know is pretty tricky. So that's my first tip. My second tip, lead by example, which is a little bit of a scary one, but bear with me. When senior leaders communicate openly and stress the value of difference, it gives other people permission to do the same. And one thing I really like to think of about this is back in 2020 during lockdown, we were having a virtual all-employee meeting, and our CEO at the time finished the meeting by saying, well, it's a lovely sunny day outside. I'm going to go into my garden and play football with my son, and I hope you all take some time now to go and enjoy the sunshine while it lasts. Now, we didn't script that. We didn't know he was going to say that. But what that did was firstly remind everyone that he's a human being as well. And it also gave everyone else permission to be themselves and to bring themselves to work and to, try and make mistakes because they knew that they were safe, which is exactly what I've written here. When you lead by example and you try and you make mistakes and you make a safe space, you make other people feel safe to try because they know that if they fail, they can just keep trying. And when people feel safe in work, they know that they can bring their whole selves to work, and they know that they'll be appreciated for it rather than singled out for it. And that's really important because when we have lots of different people, we get lots of different ideas, and that's what everyone wants, right? So my third tip, embrace two-way conversations. Now, internal comms people, we're already pretty good at having two-way conversations, but sometimes I think when we're talking about EDI or we're talking about neurodiversity, we can forget to ask these questions. Now, you guys are probably all absolutely fantastic at your jobs, But that doesn't mean you're an expert at neurodiversity. That doesn't mean you're an expert at inclusion. And when you ask for help and you're open to other people and you open up about your learning journey, everything you do will have more authenticity. And this is really, really crucial, because when you come across as authentic, people are more likely to open up to you. So when an employee opens up to you and shares a personal story or a sensitive subject, you need to thank them for opening up and ask them how you can support them. And this probably seems like a really small point, and you're probably thinking, I came here for some big, juicy tips, and you're giving me this. But when I first started working at Alzheimer's Research UK, I was working full-time, and it wasn't working for me. I was too tired, I was completely overwhelmed, and I had to cut down to 4 days a week. I was really stressed and worried about talking to my manager. But when I opened up to her and I told her the whole story, she said to me, "Thank you so much for sharing that with me. I'm going to put that paperwork through right away, but in the meantime, what can I do to support you?" And it was like a weight had lifted off my shoulders, because in that moment, I knew that I felt safe. I knew that my manager was on my side and I didn't have to keep fighting, right? And that's really important, because when people feel safe, they know that they can ask for the support they need, and they know that they're going to be treated with respect. They're not going to be judged. They're not going to be treated differently for that. It's really important. Right, that's my third tip. And my fourth and final tip, and I pretty much say this all the time, don't assume anything. Now you're probably thinking, well, yeah, no, I know that. I won't assume things. We all do, can't help it. But when we assume things, we forget that every single person's experiences, their challenges, their skills are totally unique to them, and they might not be what you expect. How can you know what people need in order to thrive if you don't ask them? You know, I like to think of it as like, let's say you've got a cactus and you go and put it in a rainforest. That cactus isn't going to thrive, it's going to struggle. And then you're going to turn up to the cactus and say, well, why aren't you thriving? All the other plants are thriving. Well, you never asked the cactus what it needed. Not that you would talk to a cactus, but it's really important to ask, because you just don't know, and you might be surprised by the answers. And as part of that, you know, you need to remember, like I said, that everyone is at different stages in their learning journey. And so what might seem obvious to you, the person who spent all their time doing this, might be brand new information to them. And on that note, it's time for some questions. We're going to open it up. We're going to help everyone else's learning journey. But I know that this can be an uncomfortable topic for people with neurodiversity and disability, so I'm just going to give you 5 really easy Q&A reminders. Firstly, this is a judgment-free zone, so please be respectful to me, but also please be respectful to everyone else watching. People often say there are no stupid questions. There are absolutely stupid questions, but what I'm saying is please ask them, because we're all at different stages in our learning journey, and what might seem like a really silly question to you might be really helpful and insightful to someone else. Thirdly, I'm welcoming questions here. Please ask me loads of questions. I want them. But please don't take that as a kind of excuse to spring a whole bunch of questions on the next neurodivergent person you see. Not everyone is going to feel comfortable talking about these really personal things, so it's really important that we're just really respectful of other people's boundaries. Like everyone else here, I'm still learning, so if I don't know the answer to your question, please just reach out to me afterwards, like on LinkedIn or something, and I can research it or maybe signpost you to somebody who does know the answer. And finally, this is a safe space and it is a judgment-free zone, but if you don't feel comfortable asking me a question, that is absolutely fine. You can just contact me afterwards on LinkedIn in a more private space, and I would be more than happy to answer your questions. So those are the reminders. I'll just leave them up there for a second. And now I think it's time for some Q&A.
Thank you, Eve, for that great session. I know you've got a couple of fans on the chat already that just have said so you're a great presenter, but also even the topic that we're talking about is so relevant, and they really appreciate you being here today to share that. Well, we're going to kick it off with a couple of questions that we've got from the chat, and again, feel free to keep putting them in or even upvoting the ones that you like. So to start off with, I know we talked about it as well earlier, about the personal stories that you've got on your intranet. So a question from Lisa is, was it difficult to find employees who were willing to share their story, or how did you find employees who were willing?
Yeah, absolutely. It was tricky at first. We started sort of Mental Health Awareness Week 2020. Yes, that's when we started. And God, it feels so long ago. We started back then, and we literally just put out an all-employee email to everyone saying, we want to share your personal stories. This is the theme for Mental Health Awareness Week. Get in touch. And we didn't get much response in the first year. We got a few sort of paragraphs from people, but it wasn't much. But what happened was we really looked after those people. We supported them through the journey. We helped them write things. We helped publish things. We gave them feedback on kind of how much engagement their stuff had gotten. And we also shared things on Yammer where people were just commenting really lovely things. And that really positive reinforcement kind of started a snowball, because the next year when we did it, we had so many people come forward wanting to share their story that we actually couldn't fit it all into the 1 week. And we had to spread it out through the whole month, through several months, which is kind of the internal comms dream.
Yep.
So I would say just be brave and start off small. Don't be concerned if you don't get much engagement at first. Just do your best, and then if you look after people and you give them that positive reinforcement, you'll get more people coming through for sure.
Perfect. And we were just saying as well earlier that those are the stories that everyone wants to read as well.
Absolutely. I call it the nosiness factor. It's people think they want to hear about the kind of organizational stuff. They don't. They want to hear the really nosy things, the things they don't hear on the kind of regular organizational comms.
Yeah, definitely. So another question here is, how have you engaged those people that don't see EDI or neurodiversity as a business priority?
That's a really tricky one. I mean, for me, it's obvious, right? Like, it's got to be a priority, because as an organization, we can't reach everyone unless we reach everyone, right? And some of those people are neurodivergent. I would say sometimes you have to start with the stats. The employment rate one really shocks people. And also, there are lots of really great stats about how much more successful companies with a strong EDI initiative are. So always lead with the stats for the people who don't care about the personal story. And for the people who do care about the personal story, you say to them, well, do you not care about how successful I am? Do you not care about, I work really hard and you want me to succeed? And they'll say, well, yeah, of course, I really like you. I really want you to succeed. And I said, well, I'm neurodivergent, I'm disabled, and those disability initiatives help me. And I think sometimes that also really helps.
Yeah, bringing a personal element to it is important.
It kind of shocks them.
Perfect. Well, we're going to jump to a couple of questions around maybe tools or processes on how you do it. So for your audio blogs, what did you use to add audio to them? Or did you have an internal employee record narration?
So literally, I just recorded them at first because nobody else was on board. So I just recorded the recordings on my phone of me reading out the blog. And then I emailed that recording to myself. And on my computer, I just uploaded it to Unily in the kind of native audio video function. Yep. And then once I'd published that, I could easily get the link and just pop the link into the blog. It was really simple. It was actually surprisingly simple.
Perfect. And then were there any other Unily functionalities that you used to support content accessibility on your intranet? And that's from Mona.
That's a really interesting question. I mean, I think we're always thinking about how we can be more accessible. So I would say we try and use all the functions on our Unily intranet to the maximum capacity, but what we do is we give people guidance. So for example, we tell people to mostly stick to using our brand colors, and our brand colors are very high contrast. It's kind of purple and orange and white. So when you stick to those high contrast colors, you make it easier for people to access. We also use the Unily documents function to upload a document, a one-page guide on how to make your kind of blog post really pop. And in that, we give kind of accessibility/engagement tips, such as when you're writing a blog, keep it short and sweet, because nobody's going to sit and read like 2,000 words. So yeah, we try and use all the functions, but I would say the most useful thing is just trying to teach people how to maximize that.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's kind of something we were talking about yesterday as well, keeping or providing templates and guides, and even just information for people to...
That's so true. We have a whole bunch of video guides on our intranet on how to use all of the kind of CMS functionality it's mostly for our comms champs, but we leave it all there because then when they get stuck, they can refer to those videos before coming to us, which saves us some time, but it also helps them out.
Yeah, definitely. So a question from Janie: how can we make a digital employee experience better for those who are neurodivergent?
I think that's a really tricky one because neurodivergent is such a big umbrella term and it refers to so many different people. I mean, like I say, I'm autistic, so I have a tendency to hyperfocus, but I'm also dyslexic, so I find reading really difficult. You know, my best friend is ADHD and she will get really distracted very easily. So what she needs to succeed at work is maybe not what I need.
Yeah.
Basically, your best way to use your employee engagement tools is just to ask people what they need, because it might surprise you. It might be really, really simple, and you're going to save yourself a whole bunch of time without having to invest in like really expensive extra things when actually you've already got that functionality. So always, always, always ask the questions, and you can use like the V2 forms function on Unily, which we've been using recently, and you can also use like surveys, comments, polls, anything. I would always just, any opportunity to ask is what I would recommend.
No, perfect. And I think the great thing about forms and polls is that you're asking individuals and you're not making, I guess, a generalization. You're actually finding out, which is good.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect. So have you ever felt held back by your disorder? And what advice would you have for someone who is neurodivergent that may be struggling in their workplace?
Yeah, I've definitely felt held back. I mean, I've lost out on jobs before because I told them I was dyslexic and they didn't give me the job. So I have 100% felt held back. And, you know, even in the office environment, I tend to find it very overwhelming. Lots of bright lights and lots of people and different sounds and stuff like that. So for me, I would always say find someone you feel safe to talk to and open up to them. It can be really scary. It's like coming out all over again. I say all over again. I'm also LGBT+, so there's lots of things to come out for, but I would say find someone you feel safe to talk to and tell them. Yeah. Even if it's not your manager, it might just be your friend in the office, but then maybe they can sit with you while you tell your manager and you can work out together what's going to help you. And unfortunately, not all managers are going to be super supportive. I hope they are, but if they're not, I think just having the bravery to ask for what you need and not being afraid to say, you know what, I'm not getting the support I need here. I'm going to take my skills and expertise and my fantastic lateral thinking elsewhere because these guys don't deserve it. And sometimes you just have to be brave enough to say that. But I hope you're able to get the support you need.
No, great question and great response. So, can you share how you may have worked with other stakeholders at your organisation to achieve some of the changes that you've made? For example, how did you get buy-in from leadership to show that this is important and this is worth their time?
Well, we're really lucky. Our CEO is fantastic and she understood from day one the importance. So she was our kind of executive sponsor, but I would say whenever you have these initiatives, it's always really helpful to have an executive sponsor because then you're not trying to fight for that space, you're not trying to fight to be heard. You've already got someone right at that senior table who can say, this is my thing, I'm sponsoring it, I want it to go well because it's going to make me look bad if it doesn't. Yeah. So I need you all to prioritize it. So I would say always try and get a senior sponsor because then that just helps sort of clear the path.
Yeah, I know, and we were talking about I don't know in which session, but it always stems from the top. And when you can make those changes up the top, then it makes it a lot easier to trickle down into that organisation. So I've got a question here. So someone I work closely with struggles with autism and feeling overwhelmed with work, and therefore it puts a lot of pressure on themselves. What can I specifically do to help them?
That's a really tricky thing because I feel overwhelmed a lot, not just from work, just from life in general, right? And sometimes there's nothing you can do, but I think the best thing you can do is just let them know that you're there for them and let them know that it's okay to not come into the office as much as everyone else. You know, most employees at Alzheimer's Research UK come in twice a week. I only come in once a week because I get really overwhelmed and exhausted and I'm just not going to get the benefit from it. Also, just trying to break things down. Sometimes, you know, when you're stressed, your problems end up all here and they feel really big. And I think sometimes just talking through it, just letting them know that you're there for them and you're ready to listen if they're willing to talk, means that it can just make those big problems feel much more manageable.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, thank you so much, Aoife, for joining us today. I think our audience definitely have gone away with some great tips, not only as an organisation and internal communicators, but also for individuals and how to respond individually. So thank you again so much for joining us in the studio.